SECfans.com, week 9. Getting to do a lot of Texas A&M this year. It's been a lot of fun so far. I'm going to talk A&M and Mississippi State this week. I want to remind y'all, as we always do, please subscribe in the comments below. And I'm going to tell you ahead of time. We usually tell you at the end. I'm going to tell you right now, give us your score prediction. Some people do, some people don't. We want everybody to this time let us know what you think the score of this game is going to be. Tell us why. Back it up with data. And let's be reasonably clean down there, y'all. Come on. All right. So, Josh, this game is a little bit of a weird one because it's hard to know what to make out of A&M. We've been pretty high on them this year. But what's interesting is since the Alabama game, one of the things that we're high on them about was their offense, and that hasn't really shown up since the Alabama game. 24-20, which was overtime, and 26 against South Carolina. And these aren't great teams. Kentucky has a pretty good defense. South Carolina has an okay defense. Arkansas does not have a good defense. And they're playing these games close. Mississippi State, on the other hand, has shown that they have a very, very good defense. I wouldn't say elite yet because they haven't played a lot of really good offenses. All right, so I'm going to ask you this question. Going into this game, both fan bases, both teams, which one should worry more? A&M fans who are facing a Mississippi State defense that's way better than the last three they've faced and struggled to score, or Mississippi State fans their team can really only run the ball. They cannot throw it. We've seen that enough this year to know they can't throw the ball. Facing not a great secondary, probably poor secondary, but an elite run defense. And I know Mississippi State's run defense is technically ranked ahead of Texas A&M's, but I actually think A&M's is better. They face better offenses, so I'll let you go with that. So who should be worried more, Mississippi State, A&M?
I think you have to be more concerned for Mississippi State, and it's I think what you're hitting the nail on the head with here is Mississippi State has struggled throwing the football, is a run-only team, and it's unfortunate because Texas A&M is an elite run defense this year and a merely bad pass defense. I'm going to say merely mediocre, but I'm going to hedge off that, and I think A&M fans probably appreciate it. They're bad, and getting into when you look at SEC conference rankings and yard per carry allowed. Mississippi State and Texas A&M are about dead tied. 3.23 allowed by Mississippi State, 3.24 by A&M. It flips a little bit. If you take out the FCS game and you just look at FBS, A&M 3.37 allowed, Mississippi State 3.5. But even that, I think, is slightly deceptive because teams are averaging under 100 yards per game against Texas A&M. They're just simply running it more against Mississippi State. It's harder to be successful when teams run the ball less because you're playing the pass more. A&M is actually having to compensate for the pass game and is still, against FBS teams, the second ranked, and against overall number one rush defense in the SEC. In our model, where we look only in FBS data and it's opponent adjusted, Texas A&M has given up 64%, 65% of opponent rush averages. That's an elite number. Mississippi State is allowing 74%. That is an excellent number. It's not quite elite. Right at the borderline. We usually say anything less than about 75% is the elite mark. So they're excellent right at the elite level. A&M is just straight up an elite run defense. That's a high mark for us. We don't throw the word elite down casually. So because of that, I get pretty concerned for Mississippi State because the pass game, even when guys are open, Fitzgerald has not been able to successfully hit them with any consistency. The LSU game last week was a disaster, and we'll probably want to talk about that in a few different ways in a minute. But you can sort of track what success Mississippi State had in a game based off their ability to run the football. Kansas State 10 yards per carry, Louisiana Lafayette 7 yards per carry, Auburn 6 yards per carry. They scored 20 points or more. In the other three games, Kentucky, Florida, LSU, they scored under 10. Now, what's interesting is Kentucky and Florida, they were under 3.5 yards per carry, and they scored 6 and 7 points in those games. LSU, which we'll have to talk about because they actually had 5.4 yards per carry against LSU, and they only scored 3 points. And what's concerning to me in a lot of ways about that LSU game was even when they were kind of functional in the run game, once they were rendered more or less one dimensional, in that case being able to mostly only able to run and weren't really able to pass, that offense just really kind of fell apart. I think A&M, with the offensive style they have, is able to generate at least some points against everybody. Against most of the teams in the SEC right now that are run-first teams, A&M is going to hold them to a low number. I think what you're going to see is I keep expecting a lot of Kentucky-like results where they move the ball more or less the whole game. They struggle to move the ball consistently enough. And when I say that, I mean we had some comments in the comments because I mentioned this about Kentucky. Consistently, I mean that you get 6 or 7 yards of play for an entire drive and then you punch it in the end zone. That you continually move the sticks. You don't get chunk plays where you get 2 or 3 first downs and then you stall and you punt, because that's been A&M's problem. I think it will be their problem all year. Their offense just isn't consistent in that manner in terms of having a very high efficiency number. But that is going to give them some scoring opportunities. They're going to continue to put up 20 points a game against I think about anybody they play. The trick is that the run defense is going to mean if you can throw it, you can maybe outscore them. In fact, as Alabama showed, you can really outscore them. If you can't throw the ball at a high level, though, they're going to shut down the run, make you one-dimensional, and you've got to get about 24 points to win the game. That may be a tall task for Mississippi State, given the way their offense has played out this season.
All right, so we talked about this in the last one and the Georgia-Florida preview, and I want to touch on it real quick in this one as well. How much, if at all, does the fact that A&M had a bye week last week, coming off of a win against South Carolina, and Mississippi State was playing a knockdown, drag-out slobber knocker in the rain versus LSU last week, how much, if at all, in your mind, does that play into the potential winner in this game?
That's a solid question. I don't know that it matters a ton. As you've heard me say, I think when you're a run team, the bye week tends to help because you get healthier. You get a little more focused and energized. And the running game is about physicality. It's about execution. And those things tend to do better when you have more focus and when you're healthier. The passing game is where I think sometimes the bye actually hurts you because passing teams are more rhythm based. So I don't know that with A&M, I'm not really sure if they're a run team or a pass team. They're fairly well balanced. They're more run than pass, but they're better at the pass than they are the run. I think it's kind of a wash. The flip side with Mississippi State is that game had to be a little bit demoralizing, I would think, for the team. Going into the game being 4-2, if they beat LSU, there was a real good shot that LSU was actually going to finish. And we've kind of joked back and forth about this a lot because we take a lot of heat from LSU fans this year. I can't pick them right to save my life. I finally did last week, but LSU, if they'd lost to Mississippi State, may have finished fourth in the West, and Mississippi State had a real shot to finish a lot higher than they had this season. They beat A&M. They still have A&M to play. They still had Alabama to play. Both their losses, the two losses going into the LSU game were both in the SEC East. They really had about everything to play for. And then all of a sudden that dream's gone. In the fact that it was so physical, I think it's going to be tough. I do think A&M probably going to come out a little healthier, refreshed, be able to run the ball a little bit better is going to help them. And I don't think it's good for Mississippi State to have been in such a brutal game, both emotionally and physically.
This is another one that may not matter at all, but I think it's kind of an interesting discussion point. So Mississippi State this year has proven to have, obviously, from a scoring standpoint, a really good defense. Even in their losses, LSU 19 points, which is, far below what they scored against Miami and Georgia. Florida 13 points, and even the Kentucky game, yes, they gave up 28 points, but it was Snell going off. It wasn't Terry Wilson having a good game through the air. He actually had a really horrible game. What difference does it matter, or I'll flip it around and say it this way, does it help A&M a lot offensively that this Mississippi State defense has done really well, but they haven't really faced a good dual threat quarterback that's got wheels and can run it? And I know Terry Wilson can run, and I know Joe Burrow had a 100-yard game this year, but neither one of them are Kellen Mond. So is that a dynamic that matters in this game or potentially matters, or is Mississippi State's defense, especially against the run, so good that it really probably won't impact the game at all?
I think it's a good question. Mississippi State's linebackers are good. Errol Thompson, Leo Lewis are talented guys. They haven't quite lived up to the potential that's been expected of them. I mean, Leo Lewis has at times been even in and out of the lineup, especially under Mullen because of issues he had in pass defense. I always think it's telling when you have defensive backs leading the team in tackles, and Abram and McLaurin. You want your linebackers to be leading the team in tackles, and Simmons is a really disruptive guy, and I think the athleticism and the line with Sweat and Simmons and Lewis and Thompson is going to do a decent job of containing, I think, Mond. But, and it's a big but, the lack of a dual threat guy means it's always this weird balance. We talk about it a lot, and I've never quite made up my mind on this. Is a dual threat guy stopped by a dynamic front seven, or does a dual threat guy neutralize a dynamic front seven? Sometimes I think it's if you're able to contain the pocket, or you keep the guy in the pocket and really get edge pressure, I think it can help a lot. But we've also seen, like the Deshaun Watson games and championships, right? That 2016 Alabama defense is one of the best ever. And the 2015 team, the secondary wasn't nearly as good. The 2015 team had an outstanding front seven, and Watson's mobility just gave them absolute fits because they just moved the pocket every other play, and it kind of neutralized it. I think there may be a little bit of that problem here, that the ability to move the pocket is going to take Simmons out of the game to a certain extent for Mississippi State. They're probably going to roll the pocket constantly. The other thing we've talked about a lot with A&M and Mond is just freaky fast. And a lot of teams, I think, and a lot of fans don't realize it until they watch A&M play, how fast that dude is. He has legitimate corner speed. And we talked about early in their season, we did the Texas A&M Alabama game as a preview, and we were watching that game, and we were blown away because at one point Mond outran one of the Alabama corners down the field. That gives fits to linebackers. So I do think it's going to be interesting because I don't know how great Mississippi State's back seven really is. A&M is going to be able to use Mon and his athleticism to move the game essentially away from the front four. And I think that could do a lot to neutralize advantages that Mississippi State's had at this point in the season, in a way they're not used to. Now, I will say conversely, it's easy to give credit to that, but I think you also have to go the other side. Maybe you can touch on this. How much is it going to affect Texas A&M? That Texas A&M also hasn't really faced a dual threat quarterback themselves, right?
Well, I will say that even after Saturday, they still won't have faced a dual threat quarterback.
Okay, that's going to rile some people up. But
he had 2.5 yards per attempt against LSU. 2.5 yards is half of an okay running outing, and this was passing the ball.
Okay, fair enough. But at least again, A&M. If you look at their leading tacklers, it's Alaka, then Wilson, and then Dodson. And so the linebackers are, they're making tackles at the linebacker level in a way that Mississippi State really isn't consistently. So I think that linebacker play is going to be a much bigger deal against Fitzgerald. But I think it goes that way too. The difference is that Mond is able to do a lot more. When you move the pocket with Mond and he gets time, he can make throws. Fitzgerald, it really all comes back to, and we should touch on the Mississippi State LSU game at this point. It comes back to the fact that I haven't seen anything from Fitzgerald that says he can take advantage if he can move the pocket and get away from the front four.
Yeah, and you say that, and we've throughout his career we've been a little bit, critical of Fitzgerald as a passer, but I don't think that we've been this critical or we've seen this poor of or this lack of a passing threat from Fitzgerald. And to me, it screams scheme and play calling. Maybe he just regressed as a quarterback, but from what I'm seeing, it's poor scheme in the way they're utilizing him and play calling. Maybe you've got a different take on it. Tell me what you think. Why does it seem like he's taking a significant step back?
There's a number of different factors, and we talked about this early on in the season. I think we mentioned it in the preseason video, and then I mentioned it in the first couple games of the year. I had real concerns with Moorhead coming in on how willing he was going to really be to adjust his offensive style and, sort of try to make his team play to the strengths of the offense coming out of Mullen's system. Now, the way Mullen used Fitzgerald was, sort of the Tim Tebow run game with a lot of quarterback power and zone read, and then really carefully, minimally used pass plays where it was a lot of single route RPO stuff. And the idea is you want to have a really open receiver and you're just exploiting a team over pursuing the run. And that's the way Mississippi State was able to gouge LSU last year. I talked a lot all last year of the fact that, and that LSU game was really weird because Mississippi State did not have traditional receivers. They don't have traditional receivers this year. What they were able to do was basically just sort of out scheme you, get guys open, and they used Mixon, Mixon really heavily as a guy that's not a tall downfield target, but if you get him the ball in open space where he's wide open, he can make a play down the field. Moorhead is trying to run a more traditional offense. It's still zone read based. It's still RPO. It's a lot, in my view, a lot too much like what it was at Penn State. There's way too many downfield shots. We have at no point in his career has Fitzgerald ever hit those shots with any consistency or accuracy. They need to be wide open for him to be successful. So you have to be very heavily run first. You have to be very judicious in your passing game, being short, easy throws, and you hit the long bomb only to keep teams honest and only when it's wide open. In my view, what they did against LSU and the way they used Fitzgerald, I think they would have been more effective with Thompson. I mean, if you're going to ask him to throw the ball 24 times in that game, I don't even know why you have Fitzgerald in there if you're going to do that against that secondary. And then when you step further, the other thing we talk about a lot, when you run the zone read, teams can and often will scheme to make the quarterback keep the ball. And you've got to be really careful that when you do that, you don't get yourself in a situation where the quarterback always has it. Last year, we were really critical with Jalen Hurts and JT Barrett of those two teams and Kelly Bryant as well. There were games where they absolutely dominated touches. And all three of those guys had some really good backs, but particularly Barrett and Hurts had excellent backfields, and they would rob them of any meaningful touches in major games. Against LSU, Fitzgerald had 24 pass attempts. He had 23 carries. Hill and Williams had 16 combined carries. You should never be in a situation where your quarterback has 47 touches and your running backs have 16. I mean, you essentially, Fitzgerald has 80% of the offense in that game. Now, he was a successful runner, 5.7 yards per carry. I get that. But Hill was pretty successful at 5.3. Outside the long run, less so. But Williams was actually pretty good at 4.7. My concern was, why are you asking him to throw 24 times, especially when he's 2.5 yards per attempt? And it just, I think the balance is a problem. And I think, if you watch teams like this and what they're asking a quarterback to do, you can kind of track success rate to a certain degree with how much you're leaning on the quarterback, how much you're asking them to do. And it's a scheme problem. And I think they need to go back to the drawing board a little bit and make a bigger emphasis on using a traditional run game and use Fitzgerald more as a play action passer. Cause the number of downfield throws against the LSU game was just never going to be successful. And it frankly baffled me that they attempted them. There was a late field interception, and I'm going to stop this one of my little rants you sent me off on. There was a downfield interception late in that game where the receiver undercut the ball, or the defensive back undercut the ball, and I think it was Battle right at the end. And the thing that baffled me about it is Moorhead just sort of sunk his head like, "Oh, I can't believe that happened." But it shouldn't shock you. At no point had Fitzgerald been able with any consistently to hit, a downfield flag route in coverage. And you shouldn't be asking him to do that. It's not fair to him as a player. It's not what he's good at. And they've got to go back to their strengths. And if they don't, and they do it in this game too, it's going to cost them. The difference though is that frankly A&M is a much better run defense than LSU was, and so they may have to throw. And that's the thing that concerns me, because if they do have to throw, no matter how much A&M's secondary has been problematic and there's guys open a lot, I don't know that Fitzgerald's going to be able to hit the open man. And if you're asking him to throw easy short routes where the guys can take it for yards, yeah, you'll be successful. If you're asking him to throw downfield, you're just going to throw a lot of plays away, and the offense is going to stagnate as much as it's been the past few weeks.
Yeah, and you kind of touched on it, sort of in a tangential way, but I think Thompson at this point with the offensive scheme that they're trying to force is a better fit. And I know it wasn't the offense he played in the bowl game, but what we saw in the bowl game against Louisville and what we saw in game 1 this year, he just seems to have that skill set for what they're trying to force onto Fitzgerald. They are different players. Both can run. One can throw and run. I think Fitzgerald's a better runner, but I think the better passing by a wider margin is with Thompson. So, all right. So I mentioned 2.5 yards per attempt against LSU. What does the model say? Are they going to have more success on the ball against Texas A&M, and will it be enough to get them the points they need?
All right. Well, we already sort of touched on a lot of this, right? The rush statistics, the pass statistics. A&M again, 110% of opponent passing averages. Mississippi State, 84%. The run defenses are good. So the prediction is that A&M is going to run for about 3 yards per carry. Mississippi State's going to run for 3.8. You need 4.5 to be successful. A&M's run game is not expected to really move the ball at all. Mississippi State is expected to move it only very sparingly. And again, that 3.8 yard per carry mark, I like sometimes to extrapolate that out and say, what does that mean based off the rest of the season? 3.8 yards per carry is Florida-ish, maybe a little bit better than the Florida game, but that's kind of what you're looking at in the run game. The difference is the passing game. As much as A&M has struggled with the pass, and as much as Mississippi State has been solid more or less against the pass, the problem is that A&M is just so much better at it to start with offensively. Mississippi State's expected to get 5.9 yards per attempt, A&M 7. We say a lot that 6.5 yards per attempt is competent. Under 6.5 yards per attempt is not really functional. 5.9 yards per attempt is hard to plot for A&M, but it's similar to the passing game they had against Kansas State, 5.7 yards per attempt, only without the run game that was dominant in that game. And then A&M, 7 yards per attempt is not great, but it's functional. And again, sort of looking at past results, a little bit like what they had against Kentucky. The model's saying only 4.75 yards per play for A&M, only 4.66 for Mississippi State. That's not much offensive production really for either team. That's expected to be the lowest output for A&M for the whole season. And then for Mississippi State, that is not expected to be the lowest output, although that's not saying a ton. It's just expected to be a little bit similar to the LSU game overall. The problem is that Mississippi State, when they've had low output, has continually failed to score. The model's seeing the same thing I saw before. It's predicting A&M 19, Mississippi State 9. The problem is if Mississippi State can't run the ball successfully, they don't really have a counter. They don't have a way to generate offense without that run game being successful. A&M has found ways to generate points and move the ball even without great yardage in games. So A&M is expected to get their roughly 20 points, and that's how the model comes up with 19-9.
19-9 is kind of weird. I'm trying to think of how they get to the points where the prediction in my mind is, because on one hand, I think an LSU is going to benefit from forcing interceptions from Fitzgerald, and A&M doesn't really have the secondary that's going to do that. Relying on fumbles for short fields for points is highly variable, so I don't see that happening either. I'm going to go just under the model score for A&M at 17 and 10 for Mississippi State. I think Mississippi State finds it a struggle to move the ball. Actually, give me 13. I'm going to say 17-13 Texas A&M. I think Mississippi State struggles to move the ball consistently like they have against other teams. But I also think, like we saw against Clemson, there's going to be like a bust in the secondary, even if it's like a 50-50 ball that could lead to a score or set up a touchdown. So even though I'm giving it a 4-point margin, I think A&M is comfortably in, not comfortably on the score, but regardless of what the score turns out to be, I think A&M comes out on top. I think they're a better team. I do think they have those holes in the secondary, But I also think they've got a quarterback like Mississippi State hasn't seen so far this year. 17-13 A&M. Tell me what you got.
So I'm going to go a little higher scoring than the model. You know that I have a lot of. I'm really high on A&M. I have been since the very beginning of the season. I have been since the Clemson game. I don't think that game was a fluke. I think you have to throw out the Alabama game because right now Alabama looks to be, I hate the cliche, but they are actually that's actually what a generational team looks like. They say that way too often, but this is actually the case. I think this year. I think it's going to be 27-7 for A&M over at Mississippi State. And the way I'll justify this is the fact that Mississippi State is really struggled the last four games throwing the ball under 5 yards per play or 5 yards per attempt in the last four games. Even the Auburn game 23-9, they threw for under 5 yards per attempt, 4.1. The point is that they've been successful when they could run it, and didn't really matter who they were playing because Kentucky does not have a great pass defense. They have a good one, but it's not a great one. And they still weren't able to pass the ball overly effectively. They weren't able to pass the ball effectively against Kansas State with 5.7 yards per attempt. They were only able to do it against an FCS team and Louisiana Lafayette, one of the worst teams in the country. So I just don't think Mississippi State, even if they get some pass, one, I don't think the passing game is going to pick up against anyone, even a bad pass defense. Two, even if they do, the second part of my concern is Mississippi State outgained LSU 260 yards to 239. They lost that game because third down efficiency was terrible, 2 of 14. They lost that game because they committed four turnovers to one, and they lost the game because the offensive balance in the scheme was really out of whack. I don't understand how you can how you can hold a team to 239 yards and lose, um, and especially outgain them and still lose. But that to me just really is concerning that I don't think the scheme is working. I think there's problems in how they're trying to execute the offense. It's possible they make a change. I think if they made the change to Thompson, this could suddenly be a pretty good team all over again. Or they're going to have to really commit to being a run first team. The problem is A&M is absolutely the wrong team to go run first. So I think it's 27-7. I think this could be a very close game if they put in Thompson and they were opened up the passing attack and they try to, do what they did against ALSU, but with Thompson exploiting A&M secondary. I just don't think it's going to happen. They'll stick with Fitzgerald, and I think they're going to kind of continue to flail at a good run defense and just have way too many negative plays in the passing game to be successful.
All right, so I want to ask you to do a little self-assessment because we've both been on A&M since the Clemson game. Well, I guess even before that because I actually predicted A&M to beat Clemson. People call me crazy. We've been high on them all year, and they've yes, Kentucky was ranked number 13 when they beat them. I don't know that historically that would be a 13th best team in the country type of team, but we keep saying possibly second best team in the West, really good offense. But at what point, with them struggling to have one score wins over bad teams, because they've had three in a row now, at what point does our narrative change a little bit and we have to start looking because we're getting really close to what we do historically, and that is not give credit when you show a pattern of struggling against poor teams. So at what point do we say A&M isn't a good team, they're just good enough to barely beat really bad teams?
I think it's a fair question, and I think what a lot of it comes down to is A&M could lose against anyone the way they're playing offense. A&M has averaged between 5.2 and 5.9 yards per play for four straight games against Alabama, against Arkansas, against Kentucky, against South Carolina. Those are very different teams with very different strengths and weaknesses defensively, very different overall qualities of defense. And A&M has scored between 20 and 26 points and almost the exact same yardage output in all four games. My concern with A&M is, and this is sort of where I come from with my score, but it's also it's a downside down the road. A&M looks like they're going to score 20 to 25 points in every game, no matter what. They've done it in every real team they've played. Again, everybody, the Clemson game was 26 points as well, right? Every game is going between 20 and 26 points. I think it's just sort of a nature of the disjointed sort of way their offense is working and how Mon is able to hit a couple plays, but they don't do anything well enough or consistently enough to be able to take their yardage. If it's 500 yards against Clemson, if it's 377 yards against Arkansas, it doesn't matter. They still get the same amount of scoring. So I think that's the concern. There's going to be a game where somebody puts up 24 points or puts up 30 points on them because of their secondary. It's going to happen when they play a team that can throw the ball well. I don't know that LSU is that team, which is why I still think they're probably going to finish second in the West, because I think they can shut down LSU's run game, and I don't know that LSU's passing game, it's been a good complement to the run. I don't think the passing game can carry them. The interesting ones for me with Texas A&M is, how are they going to go against Ole Miss, who's a terrible team, has a lot of other problems. We could do a whole video on how bad Ta'amu is right now in running the RPO system and how bad of a one-read quarterback he is, because it's holding back their entire offense. But if they're able and willing to throw downfield, it's going to be a bad matchup for A&M. And I could see Auburn miraculously becoming, quote, better in the passing game, like we see a lot of times people sort of overreact, because they do have a quarterback and they do have some pretty good receivers, and they could be able to exploit Texas A&M in the secondary. So I think it may catch up with them. It's just more a matter of who do they have on the schedule that's really good enough or consistent enough on offense to put up 24 points when they don't have a run game. I'm not sure there's really anybody left on that schedule, but it won't shock me if they lose any random game on the rest of the schedule. I think they're as likely to lose to Auburn or Ole Miss as Mississippi State in a lot of ways. It's just going to be kind of random, because they're just going to need to hope the other team doesn't score in every game, because it looks like they're going to put 20 to 26 no matter what.
All right, y'all, A&M and Mississippi State, that one's in the books. I don't think we've got much left on this one, kind of beating it to death. Give us your score prediction in the comments. Give us your MVPs in the comments. Mississippi State fans, please subscribe anyway, and let us know in the comments why we're wrong. Show us in the data what we're missing, and just let us know why you think, if you think, that your team's going to come back, bounce back after the LSU loss, and give the A&M Aggies their third loss of the season. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week, and God bless.